Those were words in English that I understood individually, but collectively, sorry, I'm going to pass. Hello again, it's Colin. This is Talk Shop, the series where we take an in-depth look at the presenting and communication styles of the world's big names to see what they're good at and what they could still do better. This time it's the final leaders debate before the British election, featuring Sir Keir Starmer and the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Let's get into it.
No, there's nothing wrong with that, and I just want to address Beverly's point.
You opposed it when I announced it.
You
literally opposed it.
If you listen to people in the audience across the country more often, you might not be quite so out of touch. Beverly.
Let's talk about audiences and interruptions. In communication generally, whether you're out for lunch with friends, you're in a business meeting with colleagues, audiences can tolerate a few interruptions as long as the points that are being made are valid. What we are intolerant of, as we've seen here, is people who interrupt consistently, constantly, and we're thinking, will you let the other person speak? We want to hear their points. We want to hear their pitch. We want to hear this response to the question in the audience. And what Sir Keir has done is then flipped that, highlighted it and said, well, look, if you actually listened, maybe you wouldn't be so out of touch. So for the Prime Minister, if he interrupted less, we would have avoided that entirely.
We spend too much on it. I set out a plan to do so. Labour oppose all of it. So the choice for you is simple. If you want higher taxes and higher welfare, that's what Keir Starmer will do. If you want lower taxes and lower welfare, that's what I will do. Do not surrender to our welfare system to the Labour Party and Keir Starmer.
Interesting for two reasons. Number one, the Prime Minister has changed the soundbite there, because in that first debate it was Labour are going to put up your tax by £2,000, and that was quickly debunked. What they've done here now is the Prime Minister has said it's higher tax. Now that's vaguer, and because tax bands are so broad and there's so many categories, are there going to be tax rises in one of those categories? Well, if you listen to think tanks and financial bodies, sounds like the incoming government is going to have to. So that's more difficult to push back on. The second point, though, is Sir Keir's response. So in the first debate, when the £2,000 tax rise was raised, Sir Keir pretty much ignored it. He refused to push back on it at all. This time, before the Prime Minister has even finished his point, the Labour leader is saying, completely wrong, that's false. So he is doing some amount of pushback, and we may see shortly a more thorough answer. So different approaches this time, and we shall see how the rest of the debate plays out with that in mind.
The flights will go to Rwanda. We will build that deterrent that multiple other European countries now agree is the right way to deal with this problem, and that's how we solve this problem. If Keir Starmer is your Prime Minister, all those illegal migrants will be out on our streets, and that is the choice for you. Do not surrender our borders to the Labour Party.
Steve, this is complete.
It's actually quite clever from the Prime Minister what's happening here with that line of don't surrender, because that's the third time he's used it in the space of 20 minutes. Here, don't surrender our borders to the Labour Party. Earlier, don't surrender your finances to the Labour Party, and I'm sure he will use it at least a couple of more times. The reason why it's clever is, number one, it's a key message. He's clearly been told, or they've planned beforehand, that's the line, let's keep hitting it again and again. And it means that it's more likely to stick than if he just said it once or twice. He's going to say it, I imagine, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, and that's the line we remember. But the second reason why it's clever is it's a pink elephant. So, for example, if I say, don't think about a pink elephant, even though the word don't is in there, the image still comes to mind. So that's why it's clever, because now it's forcing the audience to consider surrendering. And we think, oh, we don't want to do that. Maybe I should vote for you. So in that regard, it's nicely played. It's the key message being hit repeatedly, and it's the right image that he wants of surrendering being put in the minds of the audience. Let's keep going.
Do is cut taxes for people at every stage of their life. So for everyone in work, we're going to continue cutting national insurance, £900 this year. For pensioners, we have the Triple Lock Plus. We will raise the allowance, delivering a tax cut for pensioners.
I'm stopping it here because of jargon. The Triple Lock Plus. Now, I've worked in journalism and broadcasting for 15 years. And if you ask me, Colin, what's the Triple Lock Plus? I'd say, I have no idea, ask somebody else. And that's the issue. Only a chosen few in this audience and in the audience across the UK will know what that is. They'd be able to explain it. Largely, pensioners who it affects, and people who know the ins and outs of politics really in depth. But what about everybody else? What about the 3/4 of this audience and the people at home who are thinking, Triple Lock Plus? No idea what that is, but sounds good. What the Prime Minister and what Sir Keir need to do, and this is a great example of it, is to break down that jargon for everyone else. Because if you do that, then people who, even it may not affect directly, but it may affect their parents, their grandparents, they get it. They're able to say, oh, that would be a good thing. Oh, okay, fair enough, I get it. But when we just go with Triple Lock Plus, the likes of me, it goes over my head and I think, all right, sounds catchy, sounds secure, but I couldn't tell you what it is. So jargon has to be explained, because otherwise it creates an us and them. The select few who do know what it is and they nod and go, great, and everyone else who nods and says, those were words in English that I understood individually, but collectively, sorry, I'm going to pass.
The Prime Minister says he'll send them all to Rwanda. The Rwanda scheme takes a few hundred. It would take literally 300 years to get all the people who are here unlawfully to Rwanda. So they're going to stay here.
If elected, what would you do?
What would you do with them?
So at the moment, they're not being processed. So they're sitting in hotels, which you are all paying for. They're not processed, and as a result of not being processed, that means not a single one, even those that shouldn't be here, could be returned anywhere.
So it's taken us about 45 seconds, but we finally have an actual answer from the Labour leader. And the reason why this is an issue is because both the moderator and the Prime Minister, as we saw, almost ganged up and said, well, what are you going to do? And the reason why they were doing that was because he was just making the same counter-argument again and again and again. The message here is, once you've made a point, move on. We hear it. We understood it. We comprehended, okay, the Rwanda plan is flawed. It's going to take a long time for it to work. Great. Accepted. What are you going to do? But instead, he just kept going back and back and back and saying the same thing in a different way over and over again. It's like scoring a goal at the Euros and then taking the ball back to the penalty spot with an open goal and kicking it in again. You've scored. Go back to the halfway line. So, fine. He finally got onto the point. He said what he was going to do. Should have got there quicker.
Financial security that you want, I can deliver. But
zero.
if we put all that progress at risk with them, your family finances are going to get hammered. Your taxes are going to get whacked up. And that is the choice for you at this election. Do not surrender to their tax rises.
I believe that's the 7th time the Prime Minister has used the phrase, don't surrender. So I mentioned earlier, if you've got a key message to hit, it is absolutely fine to mention it a few times, because it's more likely that the audience will then remember that long after the debate is finished. The problem is, this sounds like the only key message he has, because he said it so often. So if you're going into, whether it's a pitch, it's a presentation, or it's a debate like this, you need to have more than one attack line, because when we hear this for the 7th or 8th time, now the audience goes, yeah, we get it, don't surrender. What else? So having a few options or a few lines, rather than just the one you say 7, 8, 9, maybe a dozen times by the end of the debate, it's better to have more options than just one that we say ad nauseum.
Most people not feeling better off, and this is a choice election, because if we go on for another 5 years of this under Rishi Sunak, that is not going to change. That isn't going to change. So this is the opportunity to turn the page, to rebuild our country, rebuild our public services, rebuild our economy, and make sure that we can genuinely say to ourselves we're a better country, better run, proper public services, and people feel better off. Now,
I'm stopping it here because I have an issue with what Sir Keir is saying. It's a nice sounding soundbite, but what is he actually saying? There's a lot of metaphors in there. It's a chance to turn the page. Great. What does that mean? We're going to rebuild our country. Doing what? Sounds like a massive DIY project. And then he gets onto that list there. Will be better run, proper public services. What are those? And that is what I need and what the audience needs both of these two to do, which is tell us literally, what does that mean? What does that look like? So, for example, I'll just make this up. Rather than saying proper public services, because what does that mean? Instead, if he said, I want you to be able to phone your doctor and be seen on the same day. I want there to be regular, well-running bus services in every town and city across our country. I want our council housing to be built at a rate faster than we've seen in 40 years. Cool, that's now actual things that we can see and we can picture, we can nod and say, okay, yeah, I could be on board with that. Sounds good. So anytime you're putting forward a vision, if you're vague, if you're generic, if you talk about being better off, great. What does that actually mean? What does that look like? The test or the question I often ask is, could you draw what you've said? Could you draw proper public services, Sir Keir? No, you couldn't. But could you give examples? Yes, you can.
My parents, it comforted them, even though they had tough times as parents. They didn't have a lot of money, but the thought, the idea that it would be better for their children comforted them and made their lives worthwhile. We've lost that, and we have to get it back, because in the end, the future is about our children and young people. We have to build a country, rebuild a country that is fit for them to live in and to absolutely realise all of their aspirations and their dreams. And I'm determined that we will do that.
It's a nice closer there from what I suspect will be the next British Prime Minister. He's intonating. So he's saying things like, we've lost that. We need to get that back. We have to rebuild. So he's underlining those words. And it's really sticking out for the audience there. We're thinking, okay, yeah, I believe you. That's different if he'd said, we've lost that. We need to get it back. I'm determined to help. So intonation, it can feel a bit like a performance. He is here, I suppose, on a stage in front of an audience. So it is an element of performance. But you can see the difference it makes. If you can intonate, take those chosen words, I'm determined to get that right. That's the word that stands out, rather than just a sentence delivered flatly. Overall, this is a very different debate to the one we saw 3 weeks ago. Both candidates have had a chance to reassess, perhaps even watch my analysis of the first one, and to take some notes. So for the Prime Minister, he's vaguer with his threats about the incoming Labour government. In the first debate, he was specific. He gave facts, he gave figures, most of which were knocked down. When he's more vague, he talks about higher taxes, it's more difficult to push back on. So in that regard, he's getting some points on the board. He's also hitting that message about don't surrender. In my book, he says that too much. He needs to vary it, bring in some new lines. But it works, because it's the kind of thing that I'm sure I'll remember for a few weeks. That's the message he wanted to land. For Sir Keir, he's doing better this time with the pushbacks. So rather than just letting the Prime Minister come out with some false claims and continuing on his own little path, he is actually coming in to say, nope, that's wrong, nope, that's false. And that's good, because it needed to be said. What he can still work on is, there are points where he either is on the front foot and then he still decides to have a pop at the government, or he's promising something, but funnily enough, contrasting that with the Prime Minister, he's too vague and he needs to be more specific. So very interesting overall. The only remaining question for me is that debate going to change the minds of people across Britain with how they're going to vote? I doubt it. I trust you've enjoyed this edition of Talk Shop as much as I have, and if you want to build your confidence today in how you present, visit the Pink Elephant Academy. We've got a ton of e-learning courses in there, all about presenting, dealing with the media, even writing skills as well. If you use the discount code TALKSHOP, you'll get 35% off the final cost of your purchase as a reward for watching this series to the very end. Till next time, smile and speak slowly. And if you're in Britain, vote. Remember to vote.